Back to Eve agus Fáilte. Hi, hello and welcome. It's John O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and we are here for another community question and coffee talk. So I'm going to take a sip of my coffee and let's get stuck into it. So, in case you didn't know, the Irish Pagan School has a Patreon, and the Patreon is there to support, the creative works that we do. So not everyone can buy a class, or not everyone can kind of, enroll in the courses that we have, but sometimes people just want to, you know, donate something along the way to ourselves and our work, and that's why we have the Patreon there. So there's a couple of different tiers involved in that, but the top tier is an Ask Us Anything tier. So someone can kind of engage with that, and they can just ask us anything they want to ask us. And that means that we will kind of get around to it, come back to it, do a video on it, or a blog post or something like that to directly respond to that question. So the question that I have today comes from that tier over in Patreon, and it came from Jeanette. And Jeanette was wondering, do we have a dating or a timeline for the Tuatha De Danann at all in any way, shape, or form? Or how do we kind of date or understand the dating or timeline of the Tuatha De Danann in Ireland as it currently sits? And this is a fascinating question for me, so I will do my best to answer it to the best of my ability as I can. But before we dive on further, do make sure if you haven't already, pop down into the description there, pick up the link for the free resource guide that we have. It is really a guide to what we at the Irish Pagan School say is good resources, and helps to identify those things that we get a lot of questions. We get people saying, oh yeah, I've heard of this X person or that thing. Is this book good? Is that book good? Are these a credible source, or are these a safe person to be engaging with their work or supporting them? Which is another factor for what we deem good or bad resources. Your academia information could be good, but if you're an unsafe person, regardless of the work you produce, you're still harming communities and harming individuals with your belief structure. So that is an element that we actually go through and include on those resources. So do make sure, if you're interested in getting on the mailing list and engaging with our content, or having us contact you, do make sure you're on that list. So back to our question with Jeanette. It is one that is very fascinating, and it is one that actually recently has seen some alteration and shifts in our historical view of our world, particularly in Ireland. So to kind of track it from the beginning, where we have the Tuatha De Danann. The Tuatha De Danann turn up in the origin stories of Ireland, really. Laura Gabála Éireann, or Gabála Éireann, depending on your pronunciation, is this book of the taking of Ireland, the Book of Invasions is also it's called. And so when this book was being written, when all of these stories, now again, it's not one book, right? It's not that there is this one book that defines everything. When we talk about the Book of Invasions, it is a series, a collection of stories that appear in many different works, from like the Book of Kells, the Great Book of Lecan, the Yellow Book of Lecan, the Book of Fermoy, the Book of Ballymote, all of these manuscript texts that come from the early to late medieval period, around the 1200s, is where we get this information from. But interestingly, we can actually look at the linguistics involved in what is written down in that, and we can trace the language to Old Irish, which is about the 8th or 9th century. So some of the oldest tales that we have written down about Ireland, we can point confidently and say, linguistically, this is Old Irish, this dates to 800 Common Era from a dating standpoint. So when we have this hard evidence, when we're able to kind of take these vellum ink scripts and be able to kind of carbon date them and check them. In fact, there's a project ongoing with UCC, University College Cork, at the moment, where they're trying to gather funding and invest in a further work to date the scripts more so, and to even try, and now with mass spectrometers and further advancements in technology, they want to try and take the language themselves, the writing, the lead ink writing that is on this, and then try and date that further, and then identify where there was a shift in handwriting, or where there was a shift in person, like in scribe, to try and get further information about who and how much effort went into the production of these manuscripts. So absolutely fascinating stuff. So we can say categorically, scientifically, when the sources, we can date the sources very clearly. But when we're looking at dating the language, we can get as far back as the 8th and 9th century, as I mentioned. But the stories themselves talk about a period of time that comes before then. So if we were to look at this now, and this is where things get a little bit muddier as well, because the known history of the world when it was being written down by these Christian monks was in many ways mapped against the biblical tradition and the kind of biblical understanding of time frames. And that's why when we have these earliest invasions, the first ones to come into Ireland, they find Ireland as an island already there. Like, it's not that, you know, our origin stories talk about the creation of the world. They just talk about Ireland, the island is there. And it's about these people moving into the island and finding the abundance and trying to find the ways to live. So there's not a lot of content about the first invasions, which is the Partholonians, then the Caesarians. Um, Wait, hold on. Yeah, no, the Partholonians were first, I think, and they were wiped out by the flood, as in the biblical flood. And then post that, we have the Caesarians. Wait, no, the Partholonians. Gosh, I'm getting myself muddled. Um, so yeah, no, Caesar came in with 50 people, and her 50 women, including a couple of men, were the first to occupy Ireland. As I think they were wiped out by the flood, all except Fintan, who is one of the main storytellers that we have these tales come through his perspective. The Partholonians arrive in, and they are wiped out by a plague. And then Ireland is empty for a period of time, and then the Numidians arrive in, and the Numidians kind of take occupation, but they fall under the oppression of the Fomorians, these outside aggressors, really. And it's during this period that we have the next kind of stepping stone, really, in the immigration and emigration tale that is Ireland. Oh, by the way, if anyone tries to be Ireland is for Irish people only, tell them to fuck off, because the origin stories of Ireland, the Leabhar Gavála Éireann, is about immigration and emigration. And so the sons of Nemed, these kind of three sons of Nemed who are suffering under the depression of Fomorians, go to Fintan, who survived from Caesar's time, and they're like, "What do we do?" And Fintan's like, "Lads, you just better get out. Take your people and go." And so these sons of Nemed do, and these three main groupings kind of gather up a body of people, and they leave from Ireland, and they head out and they grow in other lands. The story carries on with the children of Semyon, son of Nemed, who made it as far as Greece. And in Greece, they found themselves looking for land, looking for a place to call home, and they're given the worst kind of area of Greece, that they're given like a mountainside. And it's like, yeah, you live on rocks if you can live on rocks. But they do, and they survive, and they carry in bags big kind of lumps of earth, and they pretty much terraform this horrible landscape they've been given into arable land. They begin to grow. It begins to become very profitable. And that's when the Greeks come along. It's like, yeah, that land we gave you, yeah, we're going to need that back. You can have this stretch of rocky bullshit over here instead. And again, these sons of Semyon, these children of Semyon, did the same. And it happens that in the narrative that they're oppressed further. They keep trying to make a life for themselves and make the landscape in which they find themselves better, but then they are put upon, and then at last, they're like, their descendants are like, well, our ancestors came from this amazing island all that time ago, maybe we should go back. And that's where it shows their remembrance of Ireland, and they decide to leave Greece. And so they take the bags in which they had carried all of the dirt, and they make boats out of them. And then they decide that they're going to return home to Ireland. And just as they're getting ready to go, one lad is like, well, given that they were assholes to us, maybe we should, see them off in good form. And so they actually raid the shit out of Greece, for all the resources they can carry, and burn a whole load of it. And then they set out back to Ireland. And so the Fair Bullock is what that tribe become known as. It's made up of the Fair Danann, the Fair Bullock, and the Fair Gowran. It's three kind of sections within it, but they are all collectively known as the Fair Bullock. And so they come into Ireland and they find it empty. And so they take occupation of Ireland, and then they just live in it. They take over the rule of Ireland. And this is where we have the Tuatha De Danann turn up. And so they are Partholonians, Caesarians, Nemedians, Fair Bullock. Yeah, they're the fifth return into Ireland. And so the Tuatha De Danann come in, and then we have the Cas Maig Tuatha, the first battle of Moytura, where they fight against the incumbent Fair Bullock for a place to live on the island. And the Tuatha De Danann kind of come in. There is that conflict in the first battle. I'm not going to retell. I love these stories. I could retell all of them. If you're interested in hearing me or hear my paraphrased version of all of this, do let me know. So essentially the Tuatha De Danann come in, conflict with Fair Bullock. They become the ascendancy. They then live in Ireland for a period of time. And then there's the second battle of Moytura with the fall of Brest, with the Fomorians, the age-old ancestral enemies coming in and causing trouble, which then is resolved when Lugh takes ownership and takes kingship of Ireland. Lugh is then king in Ireland for 40 years. The Dagda's then king after him for 80 years. And then the Dagda's grandsons, MacHecht, MacGren, the grandsons of the sons of Kermit, the three sons of Kermit who actually do in Lugh. Because Lugh killed their dad a long time ago in the history. Even though Dagda brought him back. I've done a video on that as well. But eventually, these three lads are ruling Ireland, and that's when the sixth and final invasion occurs, and it is the Sons of Mill or Milaspania or the Milesians. And the Milesians, when they come in, they conquer Ireland, dominating the Tuatha De Danann, sending them into the Hollow Hills, into the underground. Not the underworld. Let's be clear here, not the underworld, not into hell or some kind of hellish domain. It's the other world on Sail Ella, in the ground in the Hollow Hills, which is why they became people of the Hollow Hills or people of the She. And so at that point, the Milaspania, the Sons of Mill, kind of take ownership of Ireland, and it's from them that the Gaels tribe is said to descend, which is the modern day people that we find in Ireland. So, whistle stop tour right down through all of the information. That is the story as we have it. But how can we then put this story against our current understanding of historical timeframes? We know all of this was the evidence of these stories, where these stories documented dates to the medieval period, the 1100s. The oldest is, I think the oldest one is oh gosh, I know I did an entire class on this. The Taking of Ireland class at the Irish Pagan School goes into all of this information in very good detail. But I think it's the Book of Fermoy. Oh no, Lara na Hudra. The Book of the Dun Cow. Sorry, the Book of the Dun Cow is the oldest extant manuscript written in Irish, and this is the one with the 8th and 9th century linguistics in it. So we can date the information from there, but the stories seem to talk about an earlier time. And the mythological cycle where we find the Tuatha De Danann is the earliest of stories that we know about for Ireland as a period. We then move into the Ulster cycle, then the Leinster cycle, Fenian cycle, and then we have the cycle of kings, which kind of takes us up to the more historical period where we can actually look at genealogies and lists and say these are the kings that were living in Ireland. So what we find in the themes of the stories involving the Tuatha De Danann is the advent of agriculture. And many of the stories talk about the Tuatha De Danann clearing landscape. There's one, for example, the Wooing of Atán, where Angus kind of makes a promise to Midder that he's going to find him the most beautiful woman in all of Ireland to be his wife, which is Atán. And when Angus goes to do that, Atán's father's having none of it. And he's like, well, if you want my daughter, then like you'll see that forest over there. I want that to be cleared. I want a plains there. And so Angus gets in over his head, can't do it, goes over to pines to his dad. He actually comes complaining to the Dagda, and the Dagda clears the entire forest in one night. And then again, Aton's father's like, yeah, well, I can't do anything with a plain that there's not irrigation, if there's no water on it. So Angus comes from the Dagda, and Dagda does the same. He draws out rivers, sculpting and changing the landscape of Ireland. But what the theme here is about deforestation, but it's about changing the landscape, changing the from Ireland, from an arboreal forest, a primeval forest almost, into a cultivatable agricultural circumstance. And that's what the narrative tells us. Now, that's when Dagda is king. But before that, when we have the end of the Second Battle of Moytura, when Brest is kind of brought forward in front of Lugh, king in Ireland, at the time, he pleads for his life. He's like, I'll offer you knowledge, I'll offer you information if you won't slay me. And Lugh's like, well, what information will you give us? And so he offers the knowledge of animal husbandry, so that, like, the cows will always be in milk. At which point Leo's like, no, we don't. We don't want that. And then he offers, like, the information of agriculture, that there would be 4 harvests every year, and it's actually a Brehon who turns around and says, well, no, we don't. That's not something that, like, we would want here. And then eventually, what the exchange ends with Bress offering the knowledge that of the good days to plant and the good days to harvest, and it's said to be a Tuesday. So Lou then accepts that. Narratively speaking, he accepts this information about when is the best days for planting and when are the best days for harvesting, and that is what saves Bress's life. Now, of course, the question is, well, why would you not accept, knowledge on how to keep your cows in milk all the time, or why would you not accept the information of 4 harvests every year instead of one? And actually, I was at a conference at the weekend in UCC Cork talking about the Tuatha De Danann, and even the academics and experts were puzzling over the same thing. And I put the question up as, like, well, given that it was a Brehon who said, no, that's not the right way to go about things, is it a fact? Could it be that what Bress was actually offering was a corrupted knowledge? Because we understand that land and the cultivation of land, it needs cycles, it needs time frames to grow, periods in which to be fallow, periods in which to restore itself, and a period in which to be planted again. So you can't just pull energy or pull kind of growth out of the same field on and on and on again without completely destroying the landscape there, or the vitamins and nutrients within the land. So I put it forward as a supposition, and people were, like, interested about that too. It's the fact that, no, maybe what Bress was actually offering was a corruption of natural order, to have 4 harvests all of the time, or the culture of consumption, to be constantly consuming, constantly needing 4 harvests all of the time, instead of allowing for periods of rest, periods of fallow, and periods of restoration. So fascinating stuff. But when we then take the themes of agriculture and clearing land and put that against what we know of Ireland and the history of Ireland, what we're dealing with is the Neolithic period. And so when we kind of look at timeframes for history of occupation in Ireland, and this is where new information has come up recently, just within the last short while, which has changed the landscape of all of this, which is brilliant. But it's currently accepted that, for example, Newgrange is like 3,000 years before Common Era. And so it's thought that kind of sits squarely within the development of Neolithic early farming kind of timeframes in Ireland. And that then would seem to align with the narrative themes or the stories of the Tuatha De Danann. So if we were to look at histories and timelines, you would be putting in the Tuatha De Danann arrival somewhere around this early development of Ireland and this agricultural time frame being the Neolithic. But that means that all of the previous invasions, all of the previous tribes, were here before that, in the Mesolithic or in the Paleolithic periods. So it's supposed that maybe the Fair Bullock is a Paleolithic tribe, and the name Fair Bullock is men of the bellies, or men of the bag, or bagmen. And so it's suggested, again, this is not 100% provable, but it's suggested that it was because each of the people, all of the men of that tribe, carried bags with them for gathering foods, or gathering, like, hunter gathering information while they're out, or food or sustainables. So there was no cultivation. They were living off the land as they found or hunting or pursuing the animals on the land. And so this is where we move into further exploration in the archaeological information, which is brilliant, because there was a discovery not so long ago of bones that were taken from the Gwendolen Christie cave in Clare. And these bones, it showed a bear's kneecap, because bears lived in Ireland a long time ago. But what was most fascinating about this was there were striation marks. There were kind of lines on the inside of the bear's kneecap. And so the expert at the time, looking at that, was like, well, no, this is butcher marks. This is like, someone taking a flint or stone tool and hacking at the back of the knee in order to disarticulate the limbs. And so if it's on the inside of that kneecap, it means that someone used a tool to kind of cut through the joint from the backside in order to kind of disarticulate the limb. And they then dated that bare bone, and it turned out to be 14,000 years ago, which pushed back occupation in Ireland to 14,000 years ago, because what we had before that was, again, Newgrange being dated at 3,000 years ago. We knew that there were tribes, we knew the developments when you go back to our older places like Rathcroghan, and depending on how much we can actually dig and how far back we could go, it kind of, we were about 11,000 years is what we could initially document, but this bare bone changed the landscape to 14,000 years ago. But it also rose up the question that if this bone was sitting in an archive for so long and no one had actually documented it or checked it actually over, what other information is there that we can kind of pursue through these bones? And so the team of people, actually met the person who recently, I met the person who had actually made that discovery, Ruth, and absolutely fascinating. But after discovering the bare bone, she was documenting a lot of these other animal bones and then got funding to do an older kind of cave trips. And that's when the next kind of change has occurred to the entire idea of occupation of Ireland. Ruth, on a trip into a cave in Castlepook, County Cork, found a huge stash of bones, more different types of bones, including reindeer, wolf bones, all the rest of it. But one of the reindeer bones also showed striation markings of flint tool working, and that when that bone was dated, that bone came out at 32,000 years ago. So this then pushes the occupation of like humans, early hominids, people using stone tools, hunter gatherers in Ireland back to like 30,000 years ago. Um, when we kind of followed through with that, though, and this, I was at a talk recently with Ruth, the current modeling of ice age or of glaciation in Ireland, or across Europe, really, has Ireland been completely covered by glaciers from, let me get this right, from 34,000 years ago up until 28,000 years ago, or 27,000 years ago. And the dating of this reindeer bone falls bang smack in the middle of it, showing that the model of glaciation is actually wrong. Because if the entirety of Ireland was covered by glaciers, then there would have been no reindeer there. They would have nothing to graze on, nothing to feed on, which means that there'd be no nomadic tribes pursuing those herds onto the island. So it means that our current understanding of human occupation on the island of Ireland is off. But there is so much more to explore and to understand about that. So I feel like I've rambled off of topic, but to bring it back into the Tuatha De Danann focus, if we were to try and put a timeline or a date period on any of this, we would historically be looking at the period of Neolithic early farming in Ireland, for the arrival of the Tuatha De Danann tribes. Now, of course, the Tuatha De Danann, being gods of Ireland, having moved into the Sidhe, into the other world, they're not stuck as Neolithic hunter-gatherers or not Neolithic early farmers. Like, the understanding is that on Sail Ella, the other life is an entire other world, an entire other life. We see it in later stories from the Ulster cycle, Actra Nera, for example, where Nera, the champion in Ulster, is sent out by Maeve and Allard from the Samhain festivities, and he ends up following and stumbling into the other world, spending over a year in the other world, and then he comes back thinking time has run away with him, but it turns out that everyone is still sitting around the same fire that he left about an hour ago. So he, shows that time and the time movement of time in the other world is very much different to ours from the stories. And so if we have moved from our understanding of early farming, early Neolithic, through Middle Ages, through medieval periods, all the way up to now, and if areas or aspects of the other world move faster in time than we do, it raises up a whole different kind of perception that's worth considering. Also, there is no information to say that the Tuatha De Danann are aliens. That wasn't part of Jeanette's question, but it's something that comes up when we talk about timeframes. We talk about them arriving into Ireland. Narratively in the story, it says that they arrive in Ireland from skyships. And some people point at that and go, yep, it's aliens. But the problem with that is that it just completely ignores all of the previous lineage or dynasty of, or descendancy of the Tuatha De Danann being descended from. Botach is the son of Nemeth that they come down from. And the fact that the Numidians were a previous tribe of humans that lived in Ireland, came under oppression of the Fomorians, and it's their descendants that go off. The Tuatha De Danann, descendants of Botach, they left Ireland up into the north and east and lived in the islands up and around there in their four great cities. And it was only again after a period of time, much like the Fair Bullock, they felt the call of returning to their ancestral homeland, but they didn't come straight back. They moved around the lands all around there, learning all the arts of druidry and skill. So that by the time they returned back into Ireland, they were a fleet of 1,000 champions, according to Uchud, the king of the Fair Bullock. He has this vision of the arrival of the Tuatha De Danann, and his druid Cassard kind of performs the augurs, and he's able to then interpret the dream or the vision that Uchud had. And he talks about this fleet of 1,000 champions who are coming, who will be victorious in every strain. They're skilled in every art, and they will bring destruction upon you. So that is what is said of the Tuatha De Danann and their arrival into Ireland. So, fascinating question, Jeanette. Thank you very much for being part of our Patreon community. Thank you very much for being here and to presenting a query that allows me to just talk about things I'm really passionate about and really interested in. This is an area that I find deeply fascinating, and how, as much as we have the archaeological evidence, the scientific evidence, there is also this narrative and story flow that we see around our culture that helps to define who and what we are today, even though it's from hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. So I will say, Gaurav Mahaga, thank you for being with us. Again, if you haven't already, do pop down, grab the link to the free resource that we have here. Join us on the mailing list. We send out kind of 3 emails a week to point at the resources that we're generating, the free resources available, let you know of any upcoming classes or upcoming free social hangouts for second Saturdays. And it's a great way to engage with our community and to be connected with us here at the Irish Pagan School. So I will say, Gaurav Mila Mahagat, thank you very much for being with me. Thank you for the question again. Look after yourself. Take care. Until next time. Slán. Goodbye.